You ever text me at 4 o'clock? It is, I'm not gonna see it.
It's on my nightstand. Well, I expected to see Mr. Hicks.
No.
I found.
I see a CH on Chris.
And he responded to it.
And he, I was trading emails with him yesterday and he asked if this was gonna be live streamed and I said, yes.
He's out of Florida, right?
Didn't ask him that question. I don't know if he's leaving like this weekend, et cetera, but he's observing.
We're down a commissioner today.
Mike,
Mike is recused.
and I'm gonna, once we start, I will announce their respective absences.
Probably need him to excuse him, really.
I talked to Mr. Price a couple different times and I said, I'm not gonna tell you not to show up today.
Cunningham, she can't make it, or she's.
Oh.
You put your coat on her chair.
Can my coat touch your coat?
As long as it doesn't bite.
You don't want me to coronavirus on it.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't bite on him.
I don't know, after that presentation from the fine people in Burlington last week, I'm not sure everything's great.
Phil, what is this, just?
We don't-
It's up for approval next Thursday. It's for you guys to have in your hot middle.
I got to this, that one. It's funny because I got a text yesterday from a buddy of mine who for some reason, unforeseen reason, was watching the hearing. Really sent me a picture of myself at a commission. He goes, this was sent to me. He goes, I have no idea why. He goes, but Todd Walter speaking. And I said, well, he's the reason I'm not in there. Yeah.
Thank you for being able to send that.
It's only supposed to be here. And then I see him. So.
It's a little long.
Yeah.
I apologize for the tight quarters in here. When I contacted building management, I said, listen, we'll be happy to take the same room we've always had. I mean, but if you've got only something smaller, we'll take that. We're not. 50-proof meeting. And they said, well, here, you can take 1938 then.
It's warmer in here.
Yeah, that is true.
That's for sure.
It's cool.
I hope you see. I want to pass through just to make sure. Yes.
Thank you for putting the signs out there, by the way.
Actually, Phil wanted to do it. I initially had it propped up on the doorway and I had one. And he goes, I'll go and I'll put them out for you. So he ran out and put the signs out.
I knew we were in the same room, but I didn't know exactly where.
That's why I figured.
So
we need to get us out there just, for whoever may come along and expect us to be in a normal spot.
He started
I wanted
walking
to make
in
sure
and I'm like, it's not in there. Waiting there. All of the signs.
So if we just laugh. You know, this has got our plans. Our agenda, et cetera. This is first seen it on the mobile version. It's usually just on. Oh, so we put.
More plans?
They have it for today, and so because on occasion we will get a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, how do I go for this, or how do I go about that?" And so
I know, I'm leaving here.
what do you think? And I did phone them years. I said, and he goes, "Well, I
Since
think
like out 70 east or 70 west.
I can add your email."
Do that too.
Oh, it's 6 o'clock.
Way it
All right.
bases of power.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to make sure, I didn't want to put too much out there.
I just.
I wish you had done that, or
In
that.
that park, it's so dark.
Okay,
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
well, I will go and I'll add
Those
the.
bumps are huge, it's.
Yeah, you
Still
can't-
waiting for one
and then there-
59.
I would assume the deer were.
Because that's the generic number I put out there.
Yeah,
just-
that's
I
fine.
saw like 4 or 5 of
Yeah,
them.
there too, but
Driving
yeah,
out.
always there,
There was one who left the
you know,
facility,
either one.
walked our car, a couple.
I just wanted to make sure.
I used to, play
You know,
basketball there a
as I
lot.
said, I got to put out there, but it would take me 5 minutes to take it back down.
Yeah.
If you said, get it off there. I just figured, you know, the more I can put out there, the less phone calls that are, like the
For
little,
you,
yeah,
yeah.
the less
Yes.
small phone calls.
If they actually know what
Have you
they're-
texted?
Exactly.
No,
And
A
so,
lot of times they don't scroll all the way, but
well, and it's, I'm not about thinking, or talking to OIT and see if they can move our meeting minutes to a different, you know, the website. Because it makes no sense that meeting minutes wouldn't be under like opinions and decisions. That if I wanted to see the outcome of something or the decision of something, I think it should be under that section, but no, it's under about us. And so I don't know why they put it there, why they insisted it be put there. So I don't know if it's just a little tricky for some people to find. So
yeah, it makes sense.
I put it under opinions and decisions. We've got our decision data out there. That's basically our database. We've got, you know, our advisory opinions that have been issued, and you would think, well, here's the minutes and all the cases that have been before us in the same section.
You still doing our kind of depositions?
Mhm.
We are, it comes in cycles, but right now we're required to use a service called Magna.
Okay,
And I
I've
think
heard of them. Mhm.
Range is trying to outsource as much as possible to reduce. So now when we request settlement checks, everything goes through this company out in California.
Okay.
They're outsourcing all their subrogation. And it's interesting, because I get these court reporters, and I'll be in Columbus and I'll get a court reporter from Akron. I'm like, you drove down here for this? And that's who they hired.
Yeah.
It can't save the money, but they're writing one check as opposed to having to
Sure.
write all those multiple checks.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll get calls from those reporters.
Do you?
Can you take this? I can't drive there. So. I have to do that. Is-
She knows we start at 11, right?
it sounds like a Saturday morning.
That's exactly what I'm doing. We play basketball on Saturday mornings. We start at 8, guys show up at 8:15, 8:20, we're like, you know, we start at 8, right?
That's like they want us, there's really a general hard push for us to use minority vendors, which we're more than willing to do. But considering.
Just stay.
Yeah. Well.
It might be easier for
High
you
school
to around this way.
Where you going that way or? Our budget is.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get out of your way and I get.
There's no getting out of my way, unfortunately. What am I like? And move over here.
The opposite, like, what you saw that last week, right? Well, but then when, okay, where do they get their?
Yes.
Minority quote?
Send me what you have on.
And there's nobody here local.
Absolutely.
I can't squeeze it anymore.
Yeah.
They have to send everything or?
They have.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we get here, we'll send you a complaint responsibility.
I'm not looking, so I said.
What they do.
Yeah, I will send you what we have.
Thank you.
I was gonna give you more time, but Scott was pushing.
Now, are you gonna be counsel for responding?
I'm trying to represent the Scott.
We'll call you.
We always don't mind.
He was supposed to.
He retired, he was kind of concerned about how much we need. I said,
We get distracted.
said, this month is an aberration, three.
Okay, just FYI, before we get started, this Kaufman just emailed me. They're not sure where they are, so but you can be updated. So, just to give you a heads up. And I get any other information, just to say. Okay, I'm sure it is. Lunch has been ordered and Chris is going to pretty much tray about it.
Pardon me?
Guys,
Dennis said he's leaving it.
come on. Bro, we also matter. Get tired of this meeting.
That's not.
You can have it.
All that.
It's in there. It's in there.
Well, okay. I mean, one of those, I said, I don't know. Okay.
Did you meet next meeting, December
No,
second?
no, this is called December 16th. This is called, Phil forgot to do an outline. I went down and copied the one from the last meeting. Or 18 meetings.
I knew there was next.
Copied that quickly. Because I already, you were up here.
Gee,
So quickly went down and got this. So the next meeting is not last Thursday.
Backwards and,
It's code.
I'm ready if you are, if Catherine's ready.
I'm long ready. I was ready, then I walked in.
Now open this meeting of the Ohio Elections Commission.
I will take the roll. Mr. Bromer,
here,
Ms. Tavares.
Here.
Mr. Norman,
here,
Ms. Cunningham.
Here.
Chair, Vice Chair, Chair Beatty.
Here.
First thing to reflect is, as he has been consistently recusing himself from consideration of this matter, Mr. Kreitz is not present where he would be, since he wouldn't be able to take part. I didn't think it was beneficial to him to spend time coming down here. And he decided to not come, only to open a meeting and then leave, which I think is a smart thing to do. And as you are all aware, I won't go into great detail, but Ms. Kaufman has had a personal family issue arise in the last day or so. And so she will not be able to attend today's meeting as well.
Is there a motion to excuse Commissioner Kaufman from today's meeting?
And we have to do Commissioner Craig's as well.
No, for
I would.
other than the fact that you really have to be here, I would move to excuse both Chair Kreitz and Ms. Kaufman.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the only matter up for consideration today is the deliberations on the hearing that was concluded on November 18th, Hicks versus Freeman et al., wherein the complaint asserted that the respondent did not provide complete information, essentially not in complete information in campaign finance reports. The commission heard all of the evidence, testimony, et cetera, over 3 consecutive meetings. Initially, the commission decided that it would deliberate at a subsequent time after the November 18th meeting was closed. Subsequently, it was brought to the commission's attention that such private deliberations would not fit within the commission's rare statutory scheme
wherein both hearings and, meetings and hearings of the commission are obligated subject to Ohio's open meetings law. And so the commission decided to set this matter for today for that consideration of deliberations on that case. And decision goes from there.
Mr. Executive Director, before we proceed with the deliberations, we'd like to speak to the deliberation as to the members of the audience, may speak, non-speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for speaking over you there. Generally speaking, when the commission takes its matters under deliberation, if it has any questions that it wants to ask of someone, certainly the commission has an ability to do so. But generally, this is a time for the commission members to express their respective opinions and not have any additional input from either any party or council. Again, unless the commission members have a specific question they would like to see answered. But again, repeating myself, this is a deliberation for the commission members to take to express their respective opinions on the case and come to some sort of a resolution on how to proceed, whether to make a full and final determination today or whether to give sufficient instruction to me to put in writing the commission's expected decision on the case that would be finalized on at the commission's next meeting on December 16th. I'm going to say, I think that's why we had given ourselves a week so that we could put this in writing, because I think it's a fairly important matter that I think it needs to be put down in writing and then considered and prepared for our next meeting, which is on the 16th, instead of waiting until the 15th.
Just to clarify that, do you believe that you should have a motion to that right now?
I don't think we need to do that right now. I think we should deliberate and then we can discuss it at the end. I would tend to.
Meant that we've already made that some kind of agreement that that's what we want to do, but okay.
No, I think we're fine just beginning to commence deliberations, however the commission wishes to do so.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear from the executive director the violations being considered that burden proof standards were to apply.
Standard is easy. It's simply the preponderance of the evidence. There's nothing, nothing more involved in that. It's even a false statement case where we're obligated to meet a higher standard. So it's just the preponderance of the evidence. The issues before the commission are related to statutes 3517 10D2, asserting that the treasurer of the campaign committee did not keep a strict account of all contributions received or expenditures made. 3517 13B, a failure to file complete and accurate failure to file complete and accurate campaign finance reports. And there are also assertions that there was improper corporate activity in violation of the Revised Code Section 3599.3. Those would be essential allegations contained in the complaint. The commission obviously heard a variety of evidence and testimony over the weeks on probably more the first two issues than the third, but those are the issues before the commission. As it relates to the authority of the commission, certainly we can find no violation. We can find a violation. If a violation is found, then we have the option available of imposing some sort of a fine sanction. As the fines are laid out and the penalty provisions provided, of not less than 15 or more than $100 a day for the campaign finance reports, corporate contribution activity up to $5,000, or we could find that there's good cause present not to impose a fine or refer the matter for further prosecution. But this is not a case in which the commission, I would say the commission is historically referred for prosecution. Unlike when the commission was looking into a case involving Travis Elkins, that was back in March and April. You know, I don't know that this case rises to the level of having that kind of a finding, in my opinion.
For the non-lawyers, the preponderance of the evidence means just tip the scale. So if you got the scales here and there's enough here to tip it, that means it's not like a criminal case.
The old 51 to 49%
Yes, indeed.
standard.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe I can start this off, our deliberations here. Like everyone else sitting here, sat through days of hearings. We saw volumes of exhibits. We had the exhibits to take home after the 18th and an opportunity to review all the exhibits. I agree that with Mr. Norman that this is an important case. The issue that gave rise to this case is, I think, extremely important for the state of Ohio. I jotted down some issues or some facts that I think are relevant, at least from my perspective. The facts that we heard throughout the hearing established that a certain amount of campaign advertising for Mr. Freeman was paid for by someone other than Mr. Freeman's campaign. Mr. Freeman acknowledged that he participated in the development of the ads, as did others involved in the Freeman campaign. Mr. Freeman agreed that his campaign did not pay for many of those ads. Invoice evidence established that Strategic Media billed Constant Content for advertising buys for the Freeman campaign. That was contained in Hicks Exhibit 13. In some cases, the smaller invoices were stamp paid, while the larger ones were not. We saw all that. In a statement from the committee to elect Alan Freeman, acknowledgement was made that invoices totaling $137,982.81 for advertisements for Freeman Allen was received on April 9th, 2021. That's contained in Hicks Exhibit 19. In this statement, the Freeman campaign also acknowledged they did on April 3rd, 2020, receive an invoice via email from Constant Content for $290,744.63. Mr. Freeman testified that he never saw it, and Ms. Jones testified that she was told it should be disregarded. Mr. Bray, in his closing statement, stated that a violation most likely occurred, but my client should not be held responsible because a bill was not provided. Essentially, because a bill was not provided. And it's my opinion that the question before this commission is the Ohio Election Commission has unrefuted evidence that a third party paid for advertising on behalf of the Freeman campaign. Should the defense, we don't know what we owe for the broadcast ads that ran in the name of the campaign committee, allow this and future committees to circumvent the requirements of RC 361713B and RC 351710D2. To me, that's the question before this commission. Does that allow circumvention of those statutes, simply saying we never got a bill?
And I will piggyback on what you said, because I know Mr. Bry argued throughout the course of this hearing that you can't pay what you don't know. But in this case, at least the treasurer for the campaign knew of an invoice for $290,000. There's no paper trail to contest that they don't have to pay that. Allegedly, there was one phone call by Mr. Freeman that came back unresponded to, but I also had the treasurer who didn't open up Exhibit X, which was the detail for that, didn't bother to even look at it, and yet Mr. Freeman had a balance of $96,707.92 in his account. It would seem to me that if you have gone through the efforts to put your face out in front of commercials to create commercials, and you know the commercials are running, you know the radio spots are running, and you know somebody has paid for them, I think it's incumbent to determine who, and at a minimum, you respond by making a filing, which was Exhibit W, saying, here's the invoice, and if you later determine that's not accurate, then you go back and supplement your report and you change. But I don't think you can bury your head in the sand and say, I don't know, so I'm not going to do anything.
As a former candidate, I would totally agree with both gentlemen. You have a responsibility as a candidate to know who is contributing to your campaign. You have a treasurer, but if you receive an invoice and you participated in the production of those commercials, and you know that many commercials were aired, and it was going to be about the amount of those invoices, you have a responsibility to either pay or find out who paid for those invoices.
Because in this instance, we know it wasn't the Ohio Republican Party because he was not the endorsed candidate.
Correct.
Anybody else have anything else to add? What about the violation of 3599.03, improper corporate activity?
I'm not sure there was evidence to support it. At least that would be my opinion.
And is that because, is that because the evidence that was presented, we really didn't truly get an understanding who ultimately paid these bills? Because even though some of these other organizations pay these bills, we know they're not just paying for their health. Money had to come from some other place, which we didn't hear any evidence towards where ultimately who paid this. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I would further that, I think if we're talking about what's before us, whoever paid those bills is not currently before us. It's only the campaign committee was Mr. Flynn.
Any more discussion? This time on that particular point, improper corporate activity.
I agree with what was stated.
Likewise, I don't think that we can pursue that simply because there was no evidence submitted. But I still believe that as far as the other issue involving the two statutes, I certainly think if the standard is a preponderance, we have met that standard. Mr. Hicks has met that standard.
Commissioner Cunningham?
I agree with what's been said. I don't even know, for improper corporate activity that we even have a party before us that's been accused of that.
There are, I was gonna say, the way the statute reads, there are certain responsibilities that the candidate and or the campaign committee has if they receive certain corporate contributions. Yes, I think that's under B, which is where we are. Generally speaking, the 35 million speaks to what a corporation can or can't do.
What's the language of B?
Just read it. It says no officer, no stockholder, or no attorney, agent of a corporation or nonprofit corporation, no member or labor party.
Is a PAC considered a corporation?
No.
No.
So the parties we have before us now are the candidate Alan Freeman and a PAC.
Right.
So I don't think we have a proper party here where we can allege improper corporate activity.
I don't even see how it was alleged, no honest. I mean, I see it was cited, but
Well, here's where it is. If you look at B, no candidate, political party official, or other individual shall knowingly aid, advise, solicit, or receive money or other property in violation of A1. So that's how it would come into play here. But I would tend to agree there hasn't been any evidence to support that aspect of the statute. You're right, but B1 starts off with no officer, stockholder, attorney, or agent. You know, and it does include a candidate. So that's how it's invoked. That's why it's before us.
was there evidence of an incorporation?
Talks to the content.
Yeah.
GPL LLC.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think there were assertions. I think there were assertions by Mr. Hicks as it related to, well, no, that was really the pack.
but do we have proof who paid it? We don't have.
That's that was my point about JLL or whatever those names are, whatever. They're not the ultimate payer.
But they did.
Somebody.
They've been
paid
written,
it.
no, I didn't say that they did right. But money had to come from another place into them to pay out.
Oh, because they were pastors.
Or well, whatever to be in it.
Well, they weren't back.
No, GPL, they were
They're
corporations.
corporate, so they paid it.
GPL's an LLC, is it not?
I think the answer.
No, I agree
is
that
yes,
they
but
wrote they wrote the check. But if I'm company A, I'm not, they're consultants, they're this, they're that, where they're getting money from another client or from somewhere else to pay that particular bill. They're not paying it for their benefit.
I understand what Otto's saying.
Yeah.
However, on the record, they paid.
That's a defense maybe for them, but.
Yeah,
But they're not, at the same point, they're
They're
not.
not named.
Right,
right.
they're not.
Right.
So it's an interesting assertion, but that's all it is at this point.
The, one of the exhibits pretty much clarifies what JPL is. JPL and Associates is a full-service political consulting firm located in Columbus, Ohio. So it's classified as a full-service firm.
Well, and the actual name of it is JPL Associates, LLC, so it's actually a corporation.
Well, technically a limited liability company and not a corporation. It's covered by 359903. Because 359903 only deals with 1701, 1702. Old-fashioned standard corporations. The statute has never been expanded to take in anything beyond that.
Even though the joint enjoy the same status in the state of Ohio.
Even though they enjoy the same status in the state of Ohio, and in some regards probably a higher status in this day and age. The statute has never been updated to cover them.
Well, I don't know if we're at this stage. I don't know if we need a motion. Or if we say, Phil, we think that there's a violation by failing to file a complete and accurate statement required under 35-1710 of the revised code. I don't know if we have to take that for a vote before us, for those in here today, or how we proceed.
Do we need to make specific findings associated with what it was? That's what we're talking about, originally a decision, I think.
I'll just interject and say, I mean, we could go either way with it in terms of how it's corrected. If you guys want to say, here are some of the findings, et cetera, that we think are important and critical for us to, to be prepared to make a decision. I can certainly put them into a writing of some sort, and then circulate that to everybody for their respective approvals, and then be prepared to act on that at next Thursday's meeting. Alternatively, if you want to go ahead and say we find a violation of 10 and 13, And here are the things that we think are most critical and appropriate for you to include in your writing. I can do that as well, because that's kind of what we did with Elkins, just going back to that particular case. In the past, we probably more historically made a decision. And then as an outgrowth of that decision, I've put something into writing.
I know, as we were speaking, I saw you taking notes, so you got the salient points that we were addressing.
Trying to.
I think it probably is most prudent that we had you put it in writing, circulate it, and then we're prepared to address this and have everybody sign it or be prepared to approve it at our next meeting. I guess that leaves the next thing to us is, do we want to move on to talk about the penalty phase?
Well, I think we should. I think that should be part of the letter that Bill drafts. What we, in fact, I thought that was going to be the eventual outcome of today's meeting, that we would deliberate and then come up with a finding. And that part of that finding would be penalty.
Right, I think, from my perspective, I think the findings affect the penalty. I mean, I sort of have trouble jumping over it to the penalty without a general discussion about the findings and what affirmative obligations and what they might have and what was and what it had. Or maybe it's just a pure numbers game, which is fine.
Give us your thoughts.
Well, I mean, what we're saying is that a candidate can't bury their head in the sand. They have some affirmative obligation to do something. Somebody does, whether it's a candidate or the treasurer.
Or a combination.
Or a combination. And Phil, is that something that, do we have a history or administrative rules and statutory basis, common law decisions on that issue? Is this an issue of first impression for us?
To this extent, I'd say this is an issue of first impression. If you look at the statutory scheme, generally speaking, treasurers have the greatest responsibility as it relates to dealing with the contributions and expenditures of the campaign committee. And, it should be repeated that the treasurer is not specifically before us because she wasn't included. Now, the campaign committee is, but the treasurer was not included as a respondent in this case. Generally speaking, a candidate appoints a treasurer and the treasurer takes on that responsibility. I'd have to look at what, what the interplay is with, how responsible, let's say, a candidate is, because we have heard a variety of testimonies that, in this case in particular, where the treasurer or the candidate more or less said there was not going to be any expenditure of funds, et cetera, unless it was approved by me. So we have that kind of evidence that was, before us, presented to us from not just from the candidate, but from a variety of sources that said, this was the authority, the hierarchy, however you want to look at it. So I mean, there is that has to come into play. Off the top of my head, because there was that admission, I think there could be some liability and responsibility placed on the candidate. But again, the primary person responsible for a committee's activity is the treasurer.
And I put on the flip side, he's aware of a $290,000 invoice, makes one phone call, does nothing else, and yet he's got $96,000 sitting in his account. If it worked for good old pesky Mr. Hicks, he'd be sitting there fat, dumb, and happy, and nobody'd be checking him. And it just seems that this is kind of the case where if this is what, we need to set an example, because you don't want people continuing to do this kind of stuff.
And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but throughout these hearings we've had on this case, there never was disagreement that a third party paid for these ads and that the Freeman campaign did not pay for them. I mean, this is truly a violation hiding in plain sight. And
He knew they were running.
Right.
Well, if I take it back one step, this is kind of like, and excuse my language here, this is kind of like campaign in a box. Hey, you want to run? We need somebody down for this area. We'll supply this to you, this to you, this to you. And you just go up there and do a little bit of this. And that's, RJ Mancini, okay? Who paid him? I don't know who paid him. I don't know. He just came down. This person was there. I don't know why they were there. Okay, I saw him this time. It was all these type of things, and I understand that that's how some things work or whatever, but I go back to your point is maybe these are how things are gonna work, but there maybe should be some responsibility to not just say, hey, they got it all taken care of me, I'm taken care of for me, as opposed to you ought to have some proactive knowledge of what's going on, really be, engaged and involved in your campaign with a certain level of knowledge, not just, show up where they say show up.
It would be different to me if this was a first-time candidate who was naive. But this guy said he'd been in politics for 20 years.
As a consultant, campaign manager, et cetera, as well as a candidate.
And I don't think at least I'm not in my mind looking at the householder Mancini that maybe the party paid for him to come down and do some door knocking. That's not an issue for me. But when you know that you have put yourself out there to create ads and you put yourself out there where you're showing up for shoots to create commercials, and those commercials and those radio ads are running, and you still to this day have no idea who paid for them and have done nothing to do it, to me, that's just wrong.
Well, and you also know that they don't run until they're paid for. I mean, none of that's running
That's
until
the
they're paid for
point.
in advance. Like, to me, that's significant, because if you have any experience in politics and ads, you know that they're not on there unless somebody wrote a check. And if you know it's not your campaign, then somebody is. Now, I'm not sure about the amount on that. There seemed to be some discrepancy as to whether or not it was attributed or not, or a valid amount, or just an invoice. And there's some discussion about records being sealed, but certainly the evidence was that there was an invoice for that amount. And a lot of discussion about whether or not it was a valid amount or way over the top because of the amount for a local campaign of a campaign in the box, as our chair says.
The other point is the candidate himself, along with the campaign team, said that they talked frequently, and authorization came from the candidate to spend the money. So he was intimately involved. It wasn't as if he was a first-time candidate, everything was done for him. He didn't sign off on any of the activities and the expenditures. And then what I keep going back to is the invoice coming in, an attachment, but nobody opened the attachment. That's unbelievable to me.
See, that doesn't, because when an invoice comes in through QuickBooks, the amount is sitting out there. And many times people know, by their gut, hey, this is wrong. I mean, I've done it myself in my own businesses or whatever. This is wrong. I don't need to open the attachment. I know it's wrong. They came back and said hey, what is this all about? This is wrong. Hey, disregard it. Now, I'm not absolving them of anything, but this issue of opening versus not opening or whatever, that doesn't trouble me as much that he did not open it. He kicked that thing off.
I look at it and go, his treasurer didn't bother to open it when you see an invoice for 300,000. To me, it's just beyond belief and unfathomable. Because if you're running that kind of campaign to go, all of a sudden I'm getting it for $300,000 invoice, and you're not seeing what the detail is, that to me, I just find it impossible to believe. And the first time they opened it is a few weeks before we have our hearing.
I don't find it as impossible to believe as I struggle with the fact that maybe it's an outrageous amount and it's too much, but to actually do absolutely nothing about it, or when you know somebody paid something for something. Where it falls apart for me is whether they opened it or not. If the amount is outrageous, some amounts do. Some things do. And somebody has to pay for it, and to just say, I didn't bother following up because the bill was too high.
Never heard from it again.
I never heard from it again, it never followed up again, but I know I was in the ads and I was responsible, and as long as nobody sends me an in-kind contribution, I'm good. Because I didn't get a bill and I don't have to do anything. There's where it falls apart for me is, I'm less offended by that, because I can understand, like Otto, when you get a bill and you just know that it's totally crazy. I mean, I do that too, when I call people and say, hey, this can't be right.
But if I got that bill and said, this can't be right, I would certainly be opening it up to go, what's the detail? How the hell did they get to $290,000? And what are they really alleging here? Especially when I've spent 14,000 out of my campaign and I've got 96,000 sitting there.
Well, for me, the other part was that the 290,000, a large sum, but we had testimony at some of the hearing dates where from people that worked in Mr. Freeman's campaign, that they knew the ads were running in one of the most expensive ad buys in the state of Ohio. And I have to think Mr. Freeman knew that also. He is experienced. And so when you know you have that kind of exposure in an expensive market, you have to believe that that's going to be very top dollar. I guess what, I get the defense that you never got a bill, but I would certainly hate to see that become precedent in the state of Ohio.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, the approach could have been, well, if the parties knew that they were gonna take care of the bill, maybe they would have never sent it at all.
Phil, as we start to address, I guess what we would say would be a fine as opposed to a referral for further prosecution. If we were to find against Mr. Freeman, that's something he would have to pay individually as opposed to coming out of his PAC money, correct?
Depends on who the finding is against and how you phrase it. Generally speaking, when we, and this is very generally speaking, when we've made a finding and imposed a fine, and yeah, I'm probably leaning more on the $1,500 amounts. It's a joint and several finding. And so wherever the money comes from, the commission's always looked at it as so be it. Even if Joe, the plumber down the street, gives us a check for $50, if it's payment for that, that's fine. We have had cases where we have said, similar to Elkins actually, where we've said this fine is against this person and that person needs to pay it.
Well, in Elkins, we didn't actually find a fine. We referred to further prosecution, didn't we?
Well,
Yeah,
we imposed fines against
His mom.
his treasurer, and the committee.
But the treasurer was a party in that one, and it's not in this one.
Correct. Agreed. So that's why I'm saying it that way, only because generally when, if we've got a typical, somebody's 5 days late in filing a campaign finance report, we impose a fine of $50, and we have the candidate, treasurer, and the committee all against us, it's joint and several. And so if the treasurer pays it, if the candidate pays it, if it comes out of the committee, that's all fine for us. So if we're going to look at doing something specific, I would encourage the commission to make it specific so that if you don't want it to come out of the campaign committee, impose it against the candidate individually, impose it just against the campaign committee. And then the money has to come from whichever respective source.
And could you, Phil, give us your position on if we find that it should be referred for prosecution? How would that look? What would they be looking at? Who actually paid for the ads? Was there coordination between the campaign and wherever the ad buyers were, if you will?
I'm a little leery to speak as to what a prosecutor would do, but all we would be sending to the prosecutor's office is obviously all the records from the case and saying the commission found a violation by this candidate and this committee, and that's what's being sent to the prosecutor's office. And then where a prosecutor would go from there, I don't, I think they would only be looking at the people that we send. Historically, that's been the case whenever we've sent a matter for prosecution. I don't know if I want to say this one's a little different because it's maybe a little, but not much.
It doesn't have the same teeth as Elkins.
Right, and also, I mean, if you look back at what the commission did previously, really referred, it was situations where either, I mean, I'm thinking back to where a treasurer more or less stole funds from either campaign committee, and we referred a matter for prosecution there. It was bundled up with other charges, or a false statement case where, you know, we made a finding and decided to set a matter for prosecution to a prosecutor against that candidate individually. So, you know, what a prosecutor would do, generally speaking, when we send it to them, is deal with the people, the individuals on the committee, whatever, that we send to them.
Are you looking for something to?
Nope. Nope, nope, nope.
So are we, making up our mind between two choices still? And we are gonna make a ruling today and request that he go for a writing, or defer making a ruling today. Have the executive director make a writing up to this, the pre-decision, and then have that circulated. We'd have the other one circulated as well, but.
It seems to me, and I haven't heard you say it, but it seems to me we have a consensus there's a violation. I think the next step is to say, what's the penalty? What are we gonna impose upon Mr. Freeman for what he's done and, or quite frankly, not done?
I agree.
And are we talking about you're talking about a violation for an in-kind contribution for campaign buys? There was also discussions about other people rendering services for which there was an opinion. Are we talking about that too? He's talking about the household, or he's talking about the guy who's down there, went door to door.
I didn't find that persuasive. To me, I thought the finding for me was that there was a failure to file a complete and accurate statement.
And that, the statute that was here.
Well, that would still be in-kind contributions that should have been in that statement, just like this is with the media buy. And that's the allegation, somebody paid for it, so you should have either spent the money or listed it as an in-kind
But let's
contribution.
use, let me use the RJ Mancini as an example. Okay, it was clear that RJ Mancini was paid for by the, pretty sure he was paid for by the Ohio Republican Party.
Oh, I see,
He was on the payroll. They go down to an area, they organize, they do these link drops, they're doing it for multiple candidates, not just Mr. Freeman, most likely. Where does that have to be reported? Does the Ohio Republican Party report any part of that? Is there expenditures, or he's on their payroll? Because that came up in the evidence, is him being on the payroll or something. And,
Right,
right, so I'm not really sure.
I think we had a W-2 which showed he was paid a grand total of like $6,000, I think.
Kids. Well, $6,000 for a period. Not
right.
for a whole year. I think there was something on there that he was making, 30-something thousand or whatever it was, but.
I think it was for the election period.
And it wasn't necessarily for this candidate either.
It was not. It's not broken down by anybody. It's just paid.
Right.
Right, and whether there's an obligation to allocate any of that or not, Phil?
Well, again, as it relates to in-kinds, you may be aware of them, but there's an obligation on whoever's paying for it to apprise you of what it is.
Yes.
So
Right.
let's, for argument's sake, let's just say the House Republican Campaign Committee was responsible for anybody that was coming down and doing those kind of things. I think at one level, the onus is on them to say, okay, here's how much we spent on your campaign, and to give that amount to the campaign committee, who then reflects it as the in-kind received. You know,
And
and
that's generally
so,
what's done.
But from the party, it would be zero since they didn't endorse him, I assume.
This is the campaign committee of the caucus.
Okay.
meaning The legislative caucus.
right, and what what the evidence showed was that the state party more or less just handed everything over to the House Republican Campaign Committee, whether it was funds, personnel, or whatever, and said, and I think they reflected how much they gave to the House Republicans in their reporting back and forth. So presumably, that amount should have come from the House Republican Campaign Committee to, obviously not just Freeman, who, in this case, we're talking Freeman, but whoever. And it was paramount on them to say, okay, this is what we provided to you. And then the campaign committee reflects that in-kind contribution. Because otherwise, they don't know what the value of it is. They know there's something there, but they don't know what the value of it is until it's reflected to them by the giver, as it were.
But, so I circle back to if there's an affirmative obligation to, if you know that those services are being provided to you, does the candidate have the affirmative obligation to seek out those in-kind contributions? Why is that different than getting a big bunch of money on a media buy versus, people are out there getting paid by somebody renting services for you? Where does the obligation, I'm having trouble sort of where those lines are drawn. Is it because it's a lot of money and it's obvious that somebody paid for it, but there's obviously people helping on your campaign committee, campaign box?
And I'm not trying to, there may be a distinction. I've never been a politician that I wanted to be, but I gotta believe when they show up for these door knockers, it's not all people paid by the party. There are people who will volunteer.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it would be almost impossible, at least from my perspective, to delineate, okay, who's paying you? They're just showing up to knock the door and hand out literature.
But in
Right,
this
but it
complaint, there were
is like
two
with RJ
allegations.
Mancini, okay,
Right.
this was, and I might not have the testimony exactly, okay, so first of all, he was assigned and given a title as campaign manager, and everybody joked about it and everything like that, okay? He had a somewhat of a specific job, to cover this area. Now, these lit drops, I think other candidates were involved in that as well, but RJ Mancini had a title on the campaign, whether it be a real title, sort of title, whatever it is. And so, and it was obvious that he was paid by somebody else. Now, open up Pandora's box, you go back to Megan Fitzmartin. Megan Fitzmartin. And in her testimony, she testified that she was working for 20 campaigns. I believe that was the number, 20, 22, something like that, 20 campaigns or whatever. She was able to, and I believe that all her compensation came from JPL. Somebody, I don't know if it was us, I don't know if it was Chris Evans, asked the question like, is there any allocation between the different candidates you work for? And she said no. She was like on retainer from JPL, rendering these services to all these folks out there. I don't know how practical it is, even for the candidate to be able to allocate what's my share portion. Maybe it should be going forward. I don't know.
Maybe
My
Mr. Barnes
question-
could educate it.
But-
Right, and my question is the affirmative obligation to where does the affirmative obligation begin and where does it end? And when is it okay not to ask?
Well, it should be the obligation of the committee, the campaign committee, when you're doing your financial report, that you get the documentation of any in-kind contributions. It's the obligation of those entities that have given you services in an in-kind manner to give you a summary and an amount of that in-kind contribution, whether it's bodies working on your behalf or whether it's resources spent on your behalf. And so both should be making sure that the documentation is given to the candidate's campaign and that the entities that are providing it in kind are putting it on their reports as well.
So to just passively wait and see if anybody gives anything to you, that's appropriate, inappropriate. Where does that obligation begin and end, and what is the time period in which it has to be done?
I wish it was more clear and that it was specified in the law who, when. Unfortunately, it's not. The obligation is still there. You have a responsibility to seek out anyone that's provided those in-kind contributions. Generally, the parties are good about sending those forms to the candidate's campaign. I can only speak for myself, but you know, that's the way they've always handled it. I've never had a caucus, so to speak, contribute. But if the Ohio Republican Campaign Committee, in this case, if they were providing services for a number of candidates, they should have sent those forms out to all of those candidates for their campaign finance reports, whether it was a pre-primary or post-primary report, would be determined by the time frame of those services.
And if you're the Freeman PAC and you know that they provided you services such as RJ Mancini, and they haven't delineated that to you, is there a responsibility for you to go to them and say, I need this for my in-kind, so I'm making accurate reporting?
I would have, but I can't say whether everyone would.
And it seems to me that Larry Householder, or not Larry Householder, but his son, Luke, I don't think there was evidence to the fact that he was compensated as it relates to this campaign. But as it relates to RJ Mancini, I think clearly was, and he was appointed and listed to be his campaign manager and was getting paid by somebody to perform those services.
If you noticed, I was over here kind of smiling in Ms. Tavares talked, only because of your comments about there's not a lot of specificity in the law, which there isn't. Generally speaking, I think what you'll find is as a post-election report is coming up, somebody like the HRCC or the ORP, you know, since we're dealing with the Republican side, but I know I've seen on the Democratic side as well, they're going to be sending notices along, you know, along with reflecting in their campaign finance report as they've identified it. They're going to be reflecting, sending along a note to the campaign committee that says, this is how much income we had as it relates to your campaign committee. Because that, you know, that's what's supposed to be reported during either a pre or a post-election period. You know, and so I think that's generally speaking how it takes place. And again, you know, I'd be loath to point a lot of fingers at the treasurer or the candidate or the campaign committee, again, because, you know, like you reference Fitzmartin working on 20 campaigns, you know, how much should have been reflected with Freeman's as opposed to somebody else's, as opposed to somebody else's, as opposed to somebody else's. And so the only way you can, it's in this particular case, I'd say the HRCC's responsibility to identify what that is and send it along to the committee. And
But Joe,
would
on
they have
that,
done so? Yeah, probably.
on that point, there's always a discussion with the campaign committee candidate, how much assistance you're going to get from the party or the caucus. So you know in advance that they're going to provide X, Y, and Z to your campaign. Sometimes it's increased based on the activity of the election. You know, maybe that's why more money was spent on those commercials.
Right.
You know, based on where that candidate is in the polling. But there is a discussion because it doesn't come out of the blue.
And if I'm reading you correctly, it's kind of like the other, when we were talking about you get the invoice and don't do anything. You can't just bury your head in the sand and say, I know I got these services, but I don't have to do anything until they report it to me.
Was there evidence that there was a discussion about the amount of the buy-ahead? Or that it ramped up?
And if you just turned gears on me, I apologize, because I was referring more to the in-kind contributions of RJ and seeing people doing stuff on behalf of the campaign as opposed to the buys.
Right, but when you said, you know, the candidate knows and they discussed with the candidate and you're talking about RJ Mancini, he's there and certainly there's evidence that he's there. There was also a lot of discussion about the media buys and how much, who knew what, about how much was being spent and what was being run by the candidate in terms of what was approved and not, and discussed and not.
I don't think there was any evidence to that. At least I don't recall any. He just knew that he had gone to be participating in creating ads. He knew ads were running. He knew somebody was paying for both television and radio ads and made zero effort to figure out who was doing it, how much it was, or what the amount was.
Right, and I didn't hear any evidence that anybody ran that by him in advance. Or he signed off on content, but was there evidence that he signed off on the money?
I don't think on the money, but I guess it's a little fuzzy on, because they kept insisting that, you know, Fitzmartin and others, that the candidate signed off on everything, that he had to approve everything. So was the question specifically asked, did he sign off on $100,000 worth of campaign ads? No, that never came before us. That question wasn't asked.
Right, to me, which relates, and I have to think it relates a little bit to the penalty to me. You said, yes, 290,000 is a good number, do it. And then you get the bill and you go, oh, that's not right.
And then you
That's
do
one
nothing.
thing. Now, the do nothing is, I'm with you on that, but it's the weird, that to me all relates to penalty.
And it seems a bit disingenuous to me that you participate in the creation of television commercials and radio spots. You know that the television and radio spots are running, and yet here we sit today and you've not paid a nickel toward any of it.
Right, or investigated, or
Right.
done anything.
Done anything. That's the problem I have with it.
Now, you do have issues with availability of records. And sealed records and how you would get them.
Well, Mr. Hicks managed to get the spots from where all the TV ads were going.
Yeah, right?
And somebody could probably ask, if you're in the commercial, if it's your commercial, you probably ask the television station, well, who paid for it?
And how much did they pay?
And how often did it run?
Because we know Mr. Hicks was able to go get all that information.
Well,
Well,
I think it is, you know, almost a reckless disregard. And I don't, from the way I heard the testimony or whatever, you know, I'm not entirely sure that he knew it, because when I listened to what the role of Megan Fitzmartin was and the role of the other gentleman that was also paid, I mean, it kind of surprised me when the other gentleman came in, the other consultant came in, the one gentleman, I can't remember his name right now.
Long Street?
No, that's the other guy.
Star something?
Yeah, him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy or whatever. He came across as, you know, very, with a lot of expertise and everything like that. And he also came across as if he was providing a lot of heavy-handed guidance to the campaign. But and in fact, I believe in his testimony, he said he was speaking to Mr. Freeman on a daily basis. Or very, very, you know, frequently.
well, it sounds like we're going round and round on this, but, you know, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Freeman, at least from my perspective, he participated in all those ads. He knew they were going to run on TV. He knew that. He knew how, and I'm pretty sure he knew how much money he had in his treasury. He knew he was embarking on expensive ad buys. And he didn't bother to wonder how they were going to be paid? It just boggles the mind to think that that could be a legitimate excuse, that I didn't approve that expenditure. Who did he think was going to pay this? I just think, you know, you have to at some point rely on common sense. And in this case, common sense tells me he knew he didn't have to pay for those ads because somebody else was going to. And the question is,
Yes,
yeah,
that's distinctly what I believe.
And to me, we also have to think about this moving forward. What precedent are we setting? That if people do this,
That's why I think I just never went.
is it a slap on the hand, or is this something you come before the commission having done this? We're gonna take swift and strong action against you.
I think we should take swift and strong action to send the message out there that this is not something that should be happening in the state of Ohio.
Do you have a proposal?
We had talked, I think you had mentioned it, Scott, how much money he has in his campaign.
96,000 and change.
And we know at least the ad buy was well in it north of that. Is that a fair statement?
I think it was alleged it was 137,000 and change.
Well, if we're looking for a motion, I would make a motion that we find that a violation occurred.
Before you do a motion, let's have some let's have a discussion on what we think an appropriate fine amount would be before we move, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I apologize for interrupting.
I was then going to add what my idea of a fine would be.
Well, why don't you tell us what your idea of a fine would
Let's
be?
talk about that.
Well, I think clearly because of the preponderance of the evidence that we just can't look past this. If he in fact had has $96,000 in his campaign fund at this point, and we know what the ad buy is, I would say the fine should be at least the 96,000.
Do we know what the ad buy is?
Well, 137,000 or 290,000, I take your pick.
More than 98, 96.
Yeah, it is, no question about it.
Agreed.
But if we're looking for a deterrent rather, 96,000 is certainly a deterrent and a finding of guilt.
Well, there's also, then that doesn't account for any in-kind for services as well, which isn't, I don't think would be a big number, but it's, to me, that we should be a number also considered.
And you talking about Luke Householder and
I don't think it was Luke Household or if there was any evidence that he was compensated or those services that I heard.
The only thing was the stay at a hotel.
He's-
So there would have been an expense for his hotel.
yeah, I just looked at Mr. Hicks's affidavit, original affidavit, and he really doesn't give any firm proof. I mean, it's speculation and yes, he was in a hotel. I think he established that, but beyond that, I'm not sure how much other proof exists out there about his involvement.
It wasn't even clear to me how much involvement was attributable to this campaign.
FYI, just looking at the Secretary of State's office, and the last report filed by Mr. Freeman showed $93,773.66 as the ending balance for the annual report filed last year. Just a side note.
So it's down $3,000. I'm guessing that's probably legal fees.
And that was as of last January.
Yes. Doesn't look like
Campaign's still open, right?
campaign committee is still open. that much is the last reflected. You know, obviously, he would have to file presumably an annual report coming up if he didn't have any other activity in this election, which I presume he didn't. Who knows where it is at this point, but that's the last that the Secretary's office shows.
Phil, I know we talked about this when you first opened up about what we can impose as far as the penalty, $100 per day, so we're not in, at least if the numbers were to, at least as Dennis has proposed, that would not be an issue, correct?
Well, I mean, you know, if you look, okay, let's say if you're looking at the maximum of $100 per day per the number of days that, you know, an inaccurate report was presumably filed, you know, an incomplete or inaccurate report. That would have been wouldn't have been the annual, hold on a second, let me see. It would have been a post-primary. Post-primary was filed in June of 2020. So that's what, about 500 days? Approximately, just, you know, thumbnailing. That's about $50,000.
I guess my proposal then would be $100 per day from the last day of the filing that it was inaccurate. It's a matter of a calculation, but I think it's, as you have indicated, probably around 50,000.
Yeah. Give a very generalized number, maybe 60, but you know.
And let me ask you a question. I just want to clarify. So the money that's in his campaign account,
That's the campaign committee's.
okay, not
Not
else.
his.
Okay, okay, just thank you
Yes,
for that distinction.
right.
That money can be utilized to support other candidates, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's my
Yeah.
answer to my question. Okay.
So Phil, we're just talking about the 35-17-13B on the complete and accurate statement.
Correct.
And on the strict account of all contributions. And that is a charge only against the treasurer. And are there two separate fines associated with the charges? Do you get charged on each count, or how does that work?
Jim, say that again?
Well, there were allegations of 3 violations,
Right.
right? One was improper corporate activity, which we were, I think, as a commission felt that that was not really somewhere that we were leaning. But the other 2 was failure to file a complete and accurate statement. And you're saying that's $100 a day.
Correct.
And then there was the charge of under 35-17-10D2, which was strict account of all contributions from whom received and purpose.
Right.
So if you find a violation of each of those, is it $100 per day per violation?
I was about to look up anything related to 10D2. Okay, 10D2, easy for me to say. The specific provision under 10D2 says the treasurer appointed under Division D1 of this section shall keep a strict account of all contributions from whom received and the purpose for which they were distributed. So it really points the finger at the treasurer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna open up the rules. Let's see how much has been shipped.
Sandwich is hot. While you're looking at that, can we go off the rec for 5 minutes, Phil?
Why not? Because I mean, it's just gonna take me some time to just look up.
Yeah.
On the record for 5 minutes.
Well, there's lunch. So.
No, might as well, you know, sandwiches are so warm.
Yeah, are they warm? And Chris is like, yeah, I'm like, okay, let's take a break then.
No. We'll talk through it.
All righty.
You asked about penalty provisions for the 10D, the 10 sections, it said 35-17-10. And our administrative rule, which expands on the statute of 35-17-1-14B1B, says failure to file, late filing, or filing incomplete or inaccurate designation of treasurer or statement of contributions or expenditures allows a fine of between $15 and $500 per day. And D2 is, and, you know, it says Division D of Section 35-17-10. So all provisions under 10D are included therein.
I want to make sure I understood you say between 15 and 500. That's quite some latitude.
That is correct.
And 13B is maximum $100 a day.
There's a maximum of 100. 35-17-1-14B1A, which covers 35-17-13 A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
Is between $15 and $100 per day. And what it is the statute allows $100 per day or 500, and our rule extends that to giving a broader allowance.
And D2, who does that apply to? It starts out the treasurer shall keep a strict account, but it's not before us.
Correct. And that's all it says.
So D2, if the treasurer is not before us, is that a statute that even applies?
I mean, I guess I'd say it certainly applies, but I don't know that we can technically apply it. Because it applies to
That was quite circular.
Does that mean that we can find the campaign committee? Correct?
Yeah. Say
We
treasurer.
can't bring the treasurer in after the fact because they're
No,
not.
because they weren't in the party.
Correct.
You're just talking about 13B. Right?
Correct. Primarily.
Or a statute that applies to the universe, but not this case.
So it seems as if our hands are tied by the $100 per day, which puts us at just north of 50,000. I propose that we impose a fine of 50,000.
On that count.
I think that's the only one we can
Okay.
impose, because the other one around the treasurer and they were not named as part of the lawsuit. Or the petition, I guess it would be.
I'm sorry.
So the committee isn't,
The committee can't be liable for 35-17 D2?
D2 just said treasurer. That's what the statute said.
This is not yours. Catherine. that is you.
Here you go. Here's the front. I have an extra. This is open and it's in front of you.
Oh, that I don't know. but-
I'll go.
It's on page 11.
It'll be a day, page or two in.
Page 15, 16.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've looked at it. Page 16. Page 16. Page 16 talks, the treasurer appointed shall keep strict, you know.
Yeah, it's what's public.
Well, doesn't, two, the treasurer appointed under division D1 and referring back to D1, which does include campaign committee.
What's a little weird in two is the treasurer's appointed and he will keep strict account of all contributions for whom received, et cetera. But then under the rate A, except as otherwise provided, a campaign committee shall deposit. So it's acting as they're two different people. That the separate duty, that one is gonna keep strict account of all contributions and the other of the deposits.
If they get the money, it's their duty to deposit it, right? So Phil, I have another question.
Do the best.
When we're talking about 35-17-13B, you said it's joint and several liability unless we make a finding otherwise. Would you make a separate finding as to each?
I am not aware of anything that would prohibit us from doing that. That's classically not how we've done it, but
And a separate fine as to each?
I believe so, yes. Again, that's generally not, I mean, you look at the breadth of our cases, that's not.
Right.
the
I'm
way,
not
but-
suggesting to do it, I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
So are we still at the point where two says the treasurer appointed, and because it seems like shall be charged, the treasurer is charged with keeping a strict account of all contributions, and because the complaint wasn't filed against the treasurer, that we can't include that in any penalty phase? Is that what we're saying?
Based on the way the statute's written, the responsibility lies, as it relates to that section, I believe the responsibility lies with the treasurer, yes.
They're not a named party, so
They're not
you
a
can't
named party.
do anything to them.
Okay, where does that leave us?
That that would leave us,
13B.
13B. And on the penalty stage, just as Scott stated in his motion.
Was that a motion?
We just been discussing.
I was going to say, because we haven't even found guilt yet, have we?
It's like, wait, how come I couldn't do the motion?
It preempted me.
Dennis tried, and I shut that down.
Yeah, no, rightly so.
And I think what we're trying to do today is not necessarily move. I think we're trying to get a consensus so that Phil can put together a written opinion. And at the next meeting, we would move to then adopt the written opinion, I think.
That's the general approach that I have been
Yeah, I don't think we're
moving forward.
necessarily doing we could do, that's what Phil started with. Do we do a motion and specific findings now, or do we have a general discussion and him reduce it to writing and let everybody digest it and consider?
Well, I, of course, will defer to the majority, but I think we ought to find a violation and then assess a penalty and then let Phil write it up. And then we'll review it next meeting and vote on it.
Well, if we move today, then we are voting on it. That's
Well,
why
that's fine then. You're right, we are.
I think that would be action. And quite frankly, I think, in fairness, I think I prefer to see it writing. And I think also have Natasha have the ability to weigh in on it.
Do her own deliberation and listen to us if she chooses.
That might be exciting.
Yeah. Give her something to do. From the moment, other than worry.
Right.
Does anybody else have thoughts on the proposed amount?
No, it seems to me like the only, I don't disagree that a significant fine and message of you can't just ignore is important, particularly given the gravity of the, the expenditures and what was happening. The question in my mind is, do you separately find the candidate and the committee? Is it one fine joint and several to both?
I think joint several would be sufficient.
I think deterrent is the fine. And I think that's what we're ultimately going to be the deterrent. And I look at it from our perspective as we're sitting here as a commission. What's the most likely ability for us to be able to collect on that fine? And when you look at the committee, knowing that they have this treasure trove of funds sitting there, I presume he would pay out of his own pocket, but I think the ultimate reason here that we're trying to impose this penalty is so people don't continue to do that in the future.
Well, and I agree with you, and I think it's important to send the message of responsibility of running your campaign, but I don't think, at least I don't want to send a message that dissuades people from participating in the political process either. We just need to participate responsibly, and we want them to participate. So that's sort of my view.
I agree with what each has said to this point. I think it's important that treasurers and campaign committees are responsible. Now, in this case, we don't have an action against the treasurer, but the treasurer should have been responsible as well. And I think they're going back to what needs to happen with the General Assembly. There needs to be more work on educating treasurers on their responsibilities, whether it's, prescribed by the Ohio General Assembly, or whether it's the Secretary of State requiring some kind of training of appointed treasurers, so that people know what they're getting into, because most of them are volunteers. There are some, like Mr. McTighe and his firm, that take on that responsibility for a number of candidates, but most are volunteers, and they're not all CPAs. They're good friends of candidates, and they take on the responsibility. Some are just negligent, but you don't know that unless they've been trained. And so I think we need to send a message that's clear so people are aware that there are serious responsibilities when you become a treasurer. And whether it's holding the committee, which ultimately works with the treasurer, accountable in this case, and the candidate. I think that's the way to send a message, so that all are responsible.
And I think it's pertinent in this case because the candidate, it wasn't a newbie, longtime candidate, had gone through the process, knew the process, and the accountant was the exact same way. I mean, she handled multiple accounts, multiple PACs, multiple candidates. It just, to me, it defies logic.
So that's towards joint several, correct?
Correct.
Well, and then the decision comes out, it says joint several. The futures individuals and committees that we choose to deter for misconduct, they'll see joint several. That means that both can be responsible.
I think so.
I think that, some discussion of Mr. Tavares's comments in the parties before the commission should be part of the opinion. That's my view. We need to at least believe to, the responsibility of the treasurer is not a part of it.
And unfortunately, because Mr. Hicks didn't bring the treasurer, I would think there's going to be an argument that the treasurer can't be brought back before this commission because it was a party that should have been joined from the very get-go, but was not.
Yeah. And I'm not saying bring a separate action with the treasurer. I'm just saying when you're talking about, if you want to send a message about what the responsibility is of the campaign committee, of the candidate, of the treasurer, then as part of the substance of the opinion, because you're talking about an affirmative duty of those people to proactively comply with the law, not just
Well,
do nothing.
let me ask you this. So
It should all
if
be-
you were writing the opinion, are you saying that, we're laying out or having the findings of facts, all who were involved, and then taking it the next step of, well, hold on, then taking it the next step of, this is what the treasurer is responsible for, should have been done. However, the treasurer was not named in this.
Yeah. I don't know that I would be that specific, other than when you're talking about the affirmative obligations, to spell out the affirmative obligations, like who has the affirmative obligation. The campaign committee, the treasurer, and the candidate, we have the treasurer and the candidate before us, and therefore.
But we don't have the treasurer.
Or, I mean, sorry, the candidate and the candidate.
And I think if you go into something about the treasurer's responsibilities, then I think in the opinion writing, it's incumbent upon us to mention that the treasurer is not mentioned, or you have a red herring fact in it
Right,
to a certain
I
degree.
don't know, we can leave it out, but I just feel like it.
I'm not saying leave it out. I'm saying
Yeah.
that you're gonna have to, we should point out that the treasurer was not brought as a part. If we feel it's important to lay out the treasurer's duty and responsibility, okay? We should also put in there that the treasurer was not named, because if you just.
I got it.
If somebody picked this up and read it, and we say all this about the treasurer, and then there's no finding against the treasurer, they would say, well, what happened with the treasurer?
I welcome anybody else to weigh in. I'm just saying if you start out with the idea that we've got this, we think that there's an important obligation here, then, and we want to send a message. I think there's a big hole if you send a message as to,
What I will add is, it's somewhat similar to what's kind of an adjunct to what Ms. Tavares talked about, where there's a real there's a real dichotomy in who is a treasurer. You know, the Ms. Jones, who's obviously the treasurer here, and the firm for which she works, and there are other firms, and you mentioned Mr. McTighe's firm that does a lot of treasurer work. That's one thing. But I just got off the phone last week with a gentleman who is involved because a campaign committee was never terminated. The guy's talking to me is from the Dayton area. Montgomery County referred him for failing to file or a late filing of an annual report. I only got into this because, you know, my friend Jerry, and he's been dead for 5 years, you know, and that's the other end of that,
Right.
you know, which makes it difficult. And I'm not saying I'm not going to put in what you're talking about, because I think it's appropriate. But I talk with a lot of people who, you know, my friend Fred asked me to do this, and I said, okay. And should they know better? I think the simple answer would be yes. But a lot of people don't realize that when they get into it. And the next thing they know, all of a sudden, you know, they're getting love notes from the commission saying you've been referred from family file.
Well, I mean, one good thing that I think that was done was that removing that the treasurer's name had to be on the disclosure or the campaign or whatever, because people used to
Right.
get people
Just
to be the treasurer as like a, another type of endorsement, like who would be good to name their treasurer, somebody that people in the community know.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
that used to be a very common practice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, to your point, Phil, I think that's the whole point of the fine and the penalty and what we consider in all of these. Because, you know, it's unusual for the commission, I would say. You're welcome to take issue, but it's unusual for the commission to really impose large fines most of the time. A lot of, because people who have sophisticated campaign committees who are retaining private consultants to do this work for them, they don't come before us that often because they do have paid professionals and their stuff's right, because they know what to do. But we do have a lot of people that come before us who are first timers, maybe in a rural election, and, you know, they could resolve their issues if they just check a box, or if they just do whatever, and I think that, I like to think that the commission, in terms of fines and penalties, but also in terms of working with candidates, which is one of the things that I really liked when we were virtual. Because I thought one of the benefits of virtual was we really had the opportunity to have people who could appear before us without having to invest 5 hours of travel in their day.
Take off a day of work.
And take up a day of work, and who were genuinely interested in resolving issues and came before the commission in an effort to do that. And the history of the commission was to work with them and help them come into compliance and resolve their issues. And sometimes there was a fine, but it was never, it reflected appropriately, I think, the expertise of the people and the size of the campaign. So I'm not worried about, you know, I think sending a message is partly about there are responsibilities that have to be made, but that's why we have discretion, I think, in fines and penalties.
I think Phil said he was going to incorporate something along the lines of what Otto said, but, and I agree. I think if you read 10D2, had the treasurer been named, let's face it, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. But the fact that she wasn't named, we're saying that has to be outside of this.
Right.
But it doesn't mean we can't nonetheless mention and then have a caveat that the treasurer hasn't been named in this instant case. It just makes sense to me.
Providing guidance.
For those future candidates, campaign committees, and people who may be asked to be a treasurer, right?
So we need to come to a number.
Well, I think your number is about as appropriate as any number I've heard. If you take the $100 a day and look at how long this has been, it's a little over 50,000. I don't think that's out of the realm when we know how serious a violation this is. So 50,000 is fine with me.
Anybody else?
And so that would be for the committee and the candidates.
Correct.
So that $100 day would be the maximum, correct?
$100 a day is the maximum fine. It could be opposed.
Unless you impose against the committee and the candidates separately.
Okay.
If. And I, if I can opine, this certainly makes a statement. Because what you kind of said, it's rare. I mean, yeah, we throw out $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 fines when we've had people repeatedly before the commission or overly, 7, 8 referrals. It's been a year and a half, 2 years since we've gotten, by the time the report was to be filed, we get them. But we reconsider those all the time. And yet we are certainly not going under the expectation that that's what we're getting from those folks. It mounts quickly and it can be substantial. This is different from those types of fines that the community imposes. This would be different.
We've imposed big fines too when there have been big campaigns, and
Yeah.
sophisticated ones where they can't reconcile or they've had issues. We've expected them to do better because we understand it's happened, but there have been rare occasions, but those are the very rare exceptions.
Any more discussion?
Well, we haven't heard from you two yet, but I haven't heard from Mr. Demaro, so I did see her shake her head like she was in.
I think I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Any
So-
thoughts on his writing or anything like that?
I think he's got his market. Everybody has thoughts on that, right?
That's a whole different issue though, I think.
I think he's got his marching orders.
So as I understand, the executive director is going to draft a document, a statement along the lines that we've just discussed.
Correct.
And our next meeting, hopefully, we will then vote on it as an initiative.
Adopt it.
I
Correct.
mean, in this particular thing, do you foresee, your structure of this having a resuscitation of facts here?
Somewhat, yes. I think that's an obligation that we have to lay some of that.
To support our decision.
Yes. Right.
Well.
Yeah.
No,
I mean-
okay, so on the 290 thing, we literally, you could put facts about the 290 issue and that could be it, in the violation we supported. I'm saying this whole, all the things that we were talking about that could go towards that. All these facts, I don't want to rehash all of them, but I mean, if we're talking about guidance, or guidance instead of sending a message, the whole circumstances of this need to be put out there a little bit, not a painstakingly, this person said this, this person said that, but really. Because I don't think that this is a case of just the, $290,000 bill showed up and somebody discarded it and that's enough to support the violation. But I believe we're looking at
Right.
a situation where, to use my words, don't use an opinion, the campaign in the box
Mhm.
thing, where you have this whole preponderance of things that occurred that kind of maybe even led to this to a certain degree.
No, I understand.
Okay.
And yet it's not, I'm not anticipating it being, 290,000 was thrown out there, it was ignored, and therefore it shouldn't have been, and, just having that be the statement I've certainly tried to keep notes what everybody said. I will see how good I did. I can always go back and listen to the,
Well, and you got to look through the hearing as well.
yeah, and I got to listen to the hearing, and I can go back and listen to things
This
as
isn't-
well. But I
This
will
isn't
put in,
any indictment on past
No.
opinions or anything like
No,
that. That's,
I don't think
we're
that-
talking about what we're trying to achieve in this opinion.
right, and I understand.
Okay.
And and what I was about to say was, I will go through and, put in things that I think both have been talked about today and things that are pertinent to the nature of the commission's finding. As I circulate this, if you see something that you say, wait a minute, he didn't include this, it needs to be added. Make that comment and, either we can discuss it, I can add in, right, yeah, not to everybody, just to me. And I'll keep working through that. Let's put it that way. And so,
When do you think we can expect to have something to review?
meeting is next Thursday. I can try and get something to you by Friday.
This week?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was gonna say Monday, but.
Yeah.
I was thinking Monday.
Yeah.
Because we talking to work on the weekend.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'm certainly not promising, but,
We just opened the door.
but I'm, I'm not gonna go right back and start on this. Because there's a couple of things Chris and I have to do otherwise, but I'm gonna try and get it done as quickly as I can, but also be as thorough as I can. And get it to you guys as soon as possible. And yeah, it may not be till Monday, but I'm gonna shoot to get it to you on Friday.
Thank you.
And that way, that gives us, mainly because I've got a lot of other stuff to do before next Thursday's meeting as well. And so I've got a variety of things on my plate, and I want to get this done.
So do each of your commissioners.
Exactly. I want to get this done so that it can start the churning process, and getting it along. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Okay.
I'm not trying to have you right. Sorry.
And you weren't. And I've done, I haven't done a lot of these, but I've done enough. You saw what I did on, you guys have all been, and what I did out of these. I've done, over the years, I've probably done about 10 of these. I've done a lot, but, you get a feel for the things you need to lay out, to substantiate what it is that you're doing. And then, also substantiate the basis for all of it. So anyway.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're done. We're done.
Scott, you take care of the recycle tonight.
I will, absolutely. There you go.